we've got two special guests today. So firstly, we're going to have Micheal from MAPS Canada. He's the executive assistant and the volunteer coordinator. So he's going to spend about 5 minutes just going through a little bit of the research and what else has been going on with MAPS and in the scientific community. And then after this, we're going to have Shannon Johnstone, who's going to talk about something really interesting with regards to ayahuasca and like the integration process, development theory. And we're just going to have a little conversation on sort of like what this healing process and all this looks like. So there's a lot of cool stuff we've got there. I'm really looking forward to that. First, we'll go to Micheal, and then we'll go to Shannon. So Micheal, if you want to just kind of go ahead. Micheal is, as I mentioned, the MAPS executive assistant, as well as the volunteer coordinator working with Mark Hayden. So Micheal, welcome, and thank you for being here and sharing with us.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much for having me. I've been wanting to come to one of these for a couple of weeks now, so I'm really excited to finally be here and meet some of you guys. So yeah, really appreciate the invite and stoked to share a little bit about MAPS with you guys. I'll just speak briefly to MAPS Canada and the work that we're doing and give you guys some updates in case you're curious. So I figure most of you might know what MAPS is already, but if not, it's like a registered nonprofit that is seeking to legalize psychedelics. And the main way that we're trying to do that is to fund psychedelic research. And so you might be familiar with MAPS in the US. That's a company that started quite some time ago now, founded by Rick Doblin. And so I represent MAPS Canada, which started in 2011. So we're kind of like a support organization, I guess you could think of, for MAPS US, but dealing with all the stuff that needs to be done here in Canada. And so we are a newer organization. So at the moment we're pretty lean and small, but we got, what makes us unique, I think, is that we're actually composed almost entirely of volunteers. So we're a volunteer composed organization, and a lot of the work that MAPS does is through volunteers, which is really quite awesome. And the people that we bring together, like the volunteer team itself, is really diverse. And I think that's one of also the unique things about MAPS. Lots of people think MAPS, they think just of like the scientific research side of things, but really we also have a focus on community building too. And I think that's a really important thing of what MAPS Canada does. And so I'll be getting into that side of things in a moment here, but first I'll just kind of give you guys a little bit of an update on more of the clinical side of things and like the studies that we were funding, because ultimately that is kind of our primary goal, as I mentioned. And so I'll just start by saying that we're currently on the tail end now of the fundraiser that we started back in November. This was at the Spirit Plant Medicine Conference we launched it, and our goal was to raise 150,000. And right now we're sitting around 230,000 towards like a new stretch goal that we had of 250K. And so we're really hoping that we're going to reach that goal before August, ideally. So over the summer, we're really hoping to wrap that fundraiser up, and we're beyond thrilled with all the support that we've had so far. We've had some really generous big donations, as well as a bunch of support from people all over the place tuning into this fundraiser. So we're really thankful for that. And to help get us over the finish line, we've launched a webinar series that's been running now. I think next week on Tuesday will be our 5th episode. Paul Stamets is going to be our guest for that episode. He's a world famous mycologist, really awesome and interesting person. If you never had the chance to hear him speak, he'll be speaking on Tuesday. And we do these episodes every Tuesday with the goal to help spread psychedelic knowledge and wisdom throughout, but also all the ticket sales from this webinar are going straight back into our fundraiser. And we've already raised, I think, close to 14K now through the webinar, which has been really incredible. So once again, if anyone out there, if you've already tuned into the webinar, we really thank you for doing that. And so I'll just quickly talk to some of the studies that we're doing. Or I guess the studies that we're funding. As you may know, MAPS's focus is on MDMA as like their psychedelic of choice, and it's been that way since their inception, basically. And so a big focus that we'll always have, I think, and have had now for the duration of our time being organization, is supporting MAPS in the US with their phase 3 trials and just helping them to get MDMA out as a medicine to treat PTSD. And so that's always something that we're helping out with funding. But there are some Canadian specific studies that we're also helping to fund. And so one of those is a cognitive processing therapy study. And so this is cognitive processing therapy is like a psychotherapy based on, it's like a psychotherapy treatment. And what we're trying to do is basically supplement that with MDMA therapy. So you have regular cognitive processing therapy, which is used to help treat PTSD, and it has around a 60% efficacy rate. But we're hoping that with MDMA therapy, like combining it, that'll actually bring that up. And so that's a study that we're also funding at the moment. And it's actually, there's kind of two sides to it, because as well as the cognitive processing side of it, we're also funding the other side of the coin, which is conjoint therapy for post-traumatic stress disorder. And so this is looking at treating PTSD in a patient, but while also having their partner really heavily involved in the therapy and in the healing process. And so it's kind of those two focuses are going to be basically what we're funding for this study. And it's spearheaded by a woman named Anne Wagner, who we actually had as a guest in December for a woman in psychedelic science panel, back when we could meet up in person and have fun events. She's based out of Montreal. And yeah, so she's running that study, or she's like one of the people that's spearheading it. And at the moment, we have a research coordinator that's been hired, and the final budget is being approved. And we're just basically waiting some confirmation now from a licensed dealer who's currently serving as a licensed dealer for the phase 3 site in Vancouver. So yeah, that's our cognitive processing therapy, which we're funding. And then one other study that I'll mention is a study that we're looking to fund on eating disorders. And so we're looking to also fund a study that looks at using MDMA-assisted psychotherapy to help treat anorexia nervosa and bulimia. And we're going to have a couple sites for this. There's 2 in Canada and 1 in the USA. So we've got Vancouver, Toronto, and then the US site is Denver. And the site in Vancouver is only going to be looking at bulimia, but the other sites are going to be looking at other things too, like anorexia nervosa too. And so this is basically initial exploratory treatment development research to basically look into this area, because there has been some promising studies in the area, but we need to do some more kind of groundwork before we can kind of say conclusively that this is a efficient treatment for this for these disorders. So yeah, like I said, it's going to be exploratory treatment research. And so yeah, those are some of the studies that we're funding. With the eating disorder study, we're not currently recruiting yet, but we're getting close to that phase. We're still just looking for some more rounds of funding for that. And so our fundraiser that I just mentioned is going to really help out with that. And right, so I also just mentioned, to wrap this up, I mentioned that we also do a lot of community building, and our big focus of ours is also like on things like education, like educating the community on the use of psychedelics and things like this. So I just would love to kind of share with you, I guess, kind of the other half of my job, which is volunteer coordinating, and just share with you some of the exciting things that we're doing internally as an organization around all our volunteers. So I guess these first 2 things aren't really, haven't had a tremendous amount of input from volunteers, but they actually have in some ways, because we've had a lot of rounds of editing on both of these documents that we're trying to publish. So Mark Hayden has authored a manual for Psychedelic Guides, which is basically just like it's exactly what it is. It's a manual on how to properly do psychedelic therapy from Mark's perspective, but he's also bounced it off a lot of other really important figures in the space. So it's a really comprehensive guide that basically can take you through what it takes to actually do psychedelic assisted psychotherapy and trip sitting in a way. It's like a advanced trip sitters manual. You can also think about it like that. So we're really excited to release that. There's actually a version of it floating around on the internet. So if you really were curious about that, you could look it up. But the final edited version is going to be, we're just in the publishing phase now, looking how to publish that. And we're also publishing a biography on a gentleman that had used microdoses of psychedelics to help treat his schizophrenia. And this is really interesting because a lot of the time when you think of people that shouldn't use psychedelics, you think of people that have schizophrenia or people with psychosis. Typically, that's kind of the narrative that's been spun, and there's a lot of fairness in that. But at the same time, there are people like the individual that our biography is based off of, who are actually using microdoses of psychedelics to help treat the symptoms. So we think this is a really interesting phenomena that we're observing, and it's not just with him, we're also observing it in other places too. So we're going to be releasing that biography soon. And a couple other things I'll just share that we're also working on. We're looking on creating a podcast, a Maps Canada podcast. We're creating a store, like an online store where you can purchase things like merch, but also potentially memberships, which is another thing that we're potentially rolling out soon. We're just in the process now of trying to figure out what that would best look like and what the best value we can add with those are. And then I'll just mention that all this work is done from a bunch of our committees. So our whole organization is divided into a bunch of different volunteer committees. We have a drug policy committee, social media committee. We have fundraising committee, diversity committee, and I'm missing some there, but they're all very important committees that we have. We have a blog committee too. And so we have some social committee initiatives that are coming out soon that I'm excited to share at our next general volunteer meeting. We have our fundraising committee has been busy with the webinar, but we're also now looking ahead to plan potentially a psychedelic gala, so like a big in-person event for whenever we'll be able to do that again. And our diversity committee has been really busy lately. They've been establishing some terms of reference for how they're going to operate in the organization. And we're also potentially talking about doing something like decolonization training, which I'm excited to help the committee roll out soon. We just got to come up with some proposals for that. Finally, we're revamping our onboarding process for volunteers. So we're in a bit of a transition phase at the moment. And helping us out with that is the folks over in Toronto. So we actually have an official Toronto support group. So if you're based in Toronto, I'll just mention that most of our volunteer efforts are based in either Vancouver or Toronto, Vancouver being kind of the hub, but Toronto being an awesome place to join too, because we just recently launched a support group there back at the beginning of the year. So there's a Toronto support group, which basically has a similar structure to the group that we have here, a bunch of committees, and they're all doing their own part in trying to help basically our cause, our main goal of legalizing psychedelics, but in their own way there in Toronto. And an amazing project that they've actually released, the folks over in the Toronto group, has been a journal club. And so this actually just happened a couple of days ago, but it's a once a month, they'll get academics or researchers in the psychedelic field to come together, and they'll do some presentations with the goal of trying to basically take some really dense scientific information around psychedelics and kind of make it digestible for people. And so that's free, and you can tune in. It's a Zoom club at the moment too. So if you're interested in that, you can find out more on our website. And really, yeah, if there's anything else that you're curious about regarding MAPS Canada, just hop onto our website, mapscanada.org. There's lots of info on there. If you want to get in touch with me, my email is there under the volunteering section, and everything else that you might want to learn is up there. So yeah, that's it for me. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Thank you, Michael, for sharing all that. There's actually a lot of really cool stuff that MAPS is doing, and that they're getting opportunities for involvement as well. Actually, I just wanted to touch up too with regards to the research as well. I remember when it was not even that long ago that most of the research was just, they were really focusing on things like end-of-life grief and how much they've expanded to other things that they can actually treat and work and do the research on. So it's just great to see that kind of progress. So definitely a lot going on there. And actually, it's interesting, there's a lot of research that's actually right here in Vancouver as well. So a lot of people don't.
There is.
It's
yes.
just, yeah. So it's very exciting. Michael, we'll also, maybe I'll just get you just in a little bit, just to put your email in as well if anyone wants to contact you with regards to that. We do have a number of volunteers that are part of this meetup as well. So if anyone ever is interested in that, it's a great opportunity to be part of it. So we'll kind of go from there. But yeah, thank you for sharing, Michael. And I think what we'll do now is just, we'll kind of introduce Shannon. I was introduced to Shannon actually through Thomas, who was part of, he did a talk on ayahuasca a little while back, and he focused a little bit more on La Dieta and the preparations for ayahuasca. So with Shannon, we're going to be talking a little bit more about sort of what the ayahuasca journey is like, and sort of what the period after, like the integration, and tie this into things like development theory, and kind of what this whole healing process looks like. So Shannon Johnstone is someone who's been working with ceremonial ayahuasca with the Peruvian Shipibo tradition for over 8 years. She's also a preschool teacher, which she's been for over 14 years. And she has experience participating in North American indigenous ceremonies, as well as she brings her perspectives from Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Gordon Nuefeld on developmental attachment theory. So she's got quite a different variety of experiences and backgrounds to bring to this conversation. So I'm just happy to have you here, Shannon, and I'd like to welcome you here.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here and to speak about ayahuasca.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. So I guess maybe I wanted to start off a little bit with just a little bit your background, just so we kind of can see like where you come from with this. Like, how did you first find out, like where did you first hear about ayahuasca? And how was that, like how did you get led in? And you said something that you were a little bit drawn into this. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I guess a little bit of preamble before the first time I heard my best friend speak to me of ayahuasca was that, you know, I was a preschool teacher. I was learning attachment theory and practicing it with the children in my care, and sort of learning it in a sense at a head level. I was experiencing it in my classroom, but it hadn't come close enough quite home yet. And there were things in my own family home and within my own being that were in need of healing. So it was a long journey that started several years before coming to the ayahuasca, I would have to say. I was in conversation with my best friend. She mentioned that she had sat in an ayahuasca ceremony 6 months before and hadn't told me. And it really was the sound of the word that reverberated through my being. And I knew instantly. I said, whatever it is that you just said, I need to connect with that. And so I went home, and at the time there really wasn't very much on the internet about ayahuasca. There was 2 documentaries, Vine of the Soul, which is highly recommended. And then the other one was David Suzuki's Nature of Things. He did a series with Dr. Gabor Mate called The Jungle Prescription. Highly recommend. I would say those are the only 2 documentaries anyone would ever really need to watch. There's a lot more on the internet now. A lot of it can be misleading. It can be information overload and not so helpful. But at any rate, for me to listen to Gabor Mate endorse this, I had been following his work and gone to his lectures whenever possible, and was really taking his work quite seriously. And so that was really a clear calling. It was certain in my being. So within a couple of months, I had my very first ceremony, which 8 years later, I'm still very grateful for. Has turned my life around. It's really, it brought into awareness how much healing work needed to happen within myself and my own family. And it's an ongoing process. It's still going on. It gets richer and deeper and more rewarding as time goes on. And I now help to support ayahuasca retreat weekends. I'm not working shamanically or within the ceremonies themselves, but I help support on the outside. And in particular, people sometimes come to me for help with their integration work. And that's a part of this work that I'm most passionate about. They say 20% of the work is getting to the ceremony and participating in it, and the other 80% is when you get home. And that's where people, I think, really need a lot of support. And that was, that's really where the work comes in. Ayahuasca doesn't heal us; she shows us, and then we go home and do the homework.
And what does a little bit, so I know that there's a big focus on what the integration period looks like and that after, and that's sort of where a lot of this, as you mentioned, all of the healing comes in and all that takes place. What are sort of like good ways that we can sort of help bring this about? And what are the right questions to ask, or like the right mindsets to have? And like, what do you find that is a good thing to focus on in this most important part, which is the integration period?
And I would say that, integration is ongoing, but the days and weeks after ceremony are critical. So to keep the dieta restrictions is essential, keeping off sugar and salt, and those sorts of things. And finding quiet space within however busy our life is, having a sort of creative endeavors are very conducive for the integration process to happen quite naturally. See, healing wants to happen. It's a natural, organic process, and we just sometimes need to keep some of the busyness out and some of the negative influences out and create a space. So I'd say time alone, creative process, time in nature, and when things get a bit sticky, to have some support from, a therapist, and not necessarily, but that can often be helpful. Good friends. In my case, I never went to a therapist, but I had my best friend by my side. We were ceremonying together, and we'd spend our integration days together over cups of tea for a good couple of days, and to really honor that space there afterwards, because the healing continues. There's a big long tail if you really set your attention for that and give it the space. It's also very good to have some structures in your life, that one of them being creating space for quiet time, or a creative project, painting, singing, drumming, the list goes on depending on the person. But also there can be certain practices, like meditation can be very, very helpful. Other structures, I'll just throw one really effective one that I know helped me greatly. Gabor Mate does recommend it. I bought the book after my very first ayahuasca ceremony. I've recommended at least to 20 friends, everybody with great results. And it's called The Presence Process by Michael Brown. And I'm not affiliated with him, so I don't get any royalties or anything, but he's made a very simple structure for integrating the unresolved emotional processes that one can do with a simple 15 minutes a day, that doesn't require much more than just showing up. And so having some structures like that one there to support you. And one more thing too, I think there's a great deal of readiness going into this work. I think, and that's individual, and nobody else can really decide if somebody's ready but the person themselves. But being really ready to take this work up, because otherwise the evening of ceremony could be just a wild ride that is soon forgotten about, even if there was lots of beauty and wonderful visions and all the rest. If we don't kind of keep holding a cord to that work, it can get forgotten. And then it was just a very expensive evening, really. If you really want to continue to spin it out, to unwind the work that was done for the weekend. Mm-hmm.
And what I'm curious too, and sort of in all this, like, where does the role of, and let's just say in a Western context, but like, where does the role of the shaman sort of end, and then this whole process take place? Because I know traditionally it would be that the shaman maybe more is involved in just that actual journey part where you're more vulnerable and everything. But it seems like a lot of that period thereafter is maybe not so much focused on. I know you're talking about this and everything, but I know even in my experience personally, I just use my own, like, for example, I would do a lot of writing. I had different sort of ways of going about it, but these are all things that I figured out on my own. I never actually had anyone specifically tell me that this is something to do, or it's something that I looked into. So I wonder if maybe you wanted to touch on, like, where the shaman fits into this, and then kind of going from there.
Well, so just quickly, you mentioned writing. That's a super duper good one. That's certainly very, very helpful during the ceremony weekends and then afterwards. So it's generally recognized. I've heard lots of conversation over time of shamans and people working in this work, that there is a shortage of after support. Shamans that I know are open to being contacted afterwards if questions and a bit more clarity is required. But generally, shamans are very good at working at night and very good at singing the Ikaros, and they've had years and years of training in that, but that doesn't necessarily qualify them as good sort of integration support. And it's all varying degrees depending on the shaman, of course. It's not to say that none of them are. Some of them may be somewhat helpful, but there's so many people. If it's a ceremony of 20 people, the shaman has a life to go to during the week and can't be on the phone with all those people all week long. So people really do need to find their support afterwards. And certainly if somebody is seeing a therapist, it's good to let them know you're going into this ceremony, and when you come out, hopefully they can help. Not always, because their training may not sort of be in line with this. Person will have to make their own call on that. So did that answer the question?
Yeah, definitely. I wanted to also dive a little bit into some of the, you were talking about the attachment theory and the different like developmental styles. Did you want to sort of maybe touch on sort of like how you've brought in some of, like, for example, you were talking about Dr. Gabor Mate and Dr. Nuefeld and like how you bring that into this sort of integration process and everything?
Well, generally speaking, I guess it would be fair to say that things that are troubling us in our adult years, most often, most of it is related to the first 7 years of life. You know, there's many scientists, doctors, therapists are in agreement with that. And in the first 7 years of life, it's almost like we're in theta brainwaves, and we're basically absorbing the programs that we will be using for the rest of our lives. Attitudes about life and about relationships, about ourselves, you know, socialization, how we relate to other people. So, and usually that's the family of origin. So, you know, our relationship first, most often with mother, you know, then father, then siblings and grandparents, aunts and uncles, and then preschool teachers and daycare workers. And as the community gets bigger, those first 7 years are laying down a lot of the subconscious, I would call them programs for just simplicity's sake. And some of them are good and useful and help us live happy, successful, and thriving adult lives. And some of those programs don't. And I would even venture to say most of them don't. And so it can be really difficult to get to a lot of those pre-verbal messages that we're carrying that is still our filter for how we're responding or reacting in our lives. So it can be very difficult to do that healing work. Certainly talking about it with a talk therapist is often not that effective. Even if you gain an understanding of how those early programs are playing out, the knowledge itself has very little, if any, effect on creating a change in your life. Even if you know what happened to you, that you were abused or neglected, doesn't necessarily mean that you're automatically healed. And so there's a process to go through. And the process, there's so many available. In my own experience, ayahuasca is one of the most efficient, most powerful, sometimes quick, and releasing and just getting right to some of it. So some of it we in our ceremonies we might visit, we might remember the things that were said or done in our presence when we were little, and sometimes not. Sometimes we simply take our bucket and throw it up energetically. Sometimes we'll shake it out of our bodies, not knowing what's being released. And I think some rewiring gets done. At least that's the experience. That's how I perceive it. You know, sometimes I feel like I go into a ceremony, I get all shaken up and I'm releasing, tremoring, you know, old traumas. And then there's almost a sense of, you know, of being on almost like a, you know, surgeon's table, being sort of sewn back up and put back together. And I guess going back to your question about the integration period, sometimes that post-ceremony, maybe your mind and your behavior needs to catch up with some of that healing work that was done in the ceremony. And that's also another really important reason for that, for taking care of that post-ceremony time. It's allowing things to percolate. There may be still more emotions that are needing releasing, but also understanding, and then opportunities. There's a kind of a freshness after the ceremonies where you'll have opportunities to perhaps respond differently to your spouse or your child or your workmate. And you get to try on these new legs that you've been given, and and now quite possibly you're rewiring some of that neural network. It's like, well, before I used to feel like a victim when my boss, you know, yelled at me or said something a certain way, and now I can stand there and be present with that, and perhaps respond in a different way than I would have before, as one potential example.
Yeah, that's really interesting to see that kind of. I know you mentioned the thing with like people feeling like their minds being rewired. I know that's something I've heard as well, and I've felt that sort of before in my previous experiences. I wonder how maybe some of this relates to, like you talk about some of the experiences that happen in early. You said the first 7 years. I know that relates a little bit to some of the early childhood or the adverse childhood experiences, the sort of like traumatic sort of things that can happen in early childhood that are in our formative years that can have sort of downstream consequences. And I wonder, like, sort of like how, if there's maybe something going on there with ayahuasca where it can maybe like reveal these to you or help you sort of reprocess them, or like maybe sort of what you were saying too with like, it sounds almost like a little bit like reframing or like viewing things through a different lens. Do you find that something that ayahuasca sort of helps people sort of see that, or is it more of like a subconscious process? So I've heard sort of different, like different sort of ways that this goes about it. I'm trying to tie in a little bit of like my personal experience with this compared to sort of what I've heard from others as well. I think it was related to the early childhood experiences, the adverse childhood experiences, and sort of like how ayahuasca helps sort of unravel those. Like, is that something that it works on? Because I know there's this idea where a lot of the adverse childhood experiences, things you have, a lot of these traumas, like some of them are not very serious things as well, but they still affect your, like in your formative years, and they have downstream consequences to your behaviors. And some of these, or even a lot of them, you don't even necessarily remember. Sometimes your mind can maybe hide them from you or block them, or it's something that changes. And I think the question was a little bit towards like maybe what role ayahuasca plays in this. Like, does it reveal them to you or help them reframe it? I wonder sort of what maybe your perspective is on that. I have heard a lot of different things on this, and I don't know if there is one answer, but I'd be happy to sort of hear your perspective on how ayahuasca plays a role in that.
Well, from my own experience, there's been times when I've been clearly seeing and understanding where things went, maybe a little bit off, and I had a sense of what was being reworked. But to be honest, much of it has just been simply releasing it, as in taking out the garbage can. You don't look inside to see what's in there. You just wrap it up and let it go. So a lot of times there can be shaking, that sort of trembling, trauma release, and very often not knowing what it is. That's been a lot of my experience. And then sometimes I do get to see, I may be purging into my bucket and I have a clear vision. I know what I'm letting go of. And over time, I came to trust ayahuasca, that if she needs me to know specifically what it is, because I'm going to have to work something through, she'll let me know what it's about. Other times I lay on the surgeon's table and, allow the surgery without asking for all the minute details about what he's seeing and what's going on. I just allow, trusting, over the years that she'll be setting things right and taking care of things. So what I need to know, I do know, and the rest I just let it go. That's kind of an important thing to mention too about ayahuasca, is that some people are more or less comfortable with being in control. And clearly in these ceremonies, we do participate, but we're not in control, in the same way that we're really not in control of life. And so surrendering is really important, and not always understanding. That can be hard for some people more than others, but not always knowing what's happening it's very useful in this healing work, to really kind of get the most out of the medicine. And I'm not sure if I answered all parts of your question.
No, that's perfect. In regards to the purge too, I find it quite fascinating too that a lot of people, like not everyone obviously gets it, but the idea that you're kind of like purging or exiting a lot of sort of negative energy or trauma from your body, I find really fascinating. And the tremors being a big one, I know that you're speaking of as well. I wonder sort of what, there's an interesting, during my experience, I had a gentleman beside me who, he was telling me that this was his second time trying and journeying with ayahuasca. And his first time, he had virtually no experience. He even took the booster. I think he took 2 boosters and still felt just about nothing. He said he felt like a very slight glow in his body, but overall it was just nothing. Everyone else around him had a full experience, but he didn't. And I find it really interesting. And I just wonder if maybe you'd want to talk a little bit about sort of what this is and what that means.
Yeah, I've heard that numerous times from people too. It happens occasionally where somebody afterwards, after the ceremony, will say, well, I didn't really feel anything. Nothing happened. I remember years ago, one shaman I was working with, he was giving his preamble speech to everybody before the ceremony. And he said, please don't come to me after the ceremony and tell me that nothing happened, because there's never nothing happening. So the way I interpret that is, even a block, there's something happening. There's some resistance probably, or something else. And to be curious about it and explore the block as part of it. Nothing's excluded. Even when you have a so-called, a ceremony where not much happens, maybe a flat ceremony, that has teachings in it, and graciously accept that too. And mine it for what it's worth, because one possibility could be that the person has a tendency to check out. Let's say they disassociate in life when things get tough, or when a sensitive issue is coming close to them. That could be what's happening in the ceremony. And that's an opportunity for them to learn about themselves and to see that. And there's great healing in that. So there's never nothing happening.
Do you think it makes a difference to come into the ceremony with very specific intentions, or can that maybe negatively color sort of your outcomes? Like if you're trying to, the reason I ask is because if I'm trying to differentiate maybe between intentions, but between also coming in like being beholden to something or being beholden to an outcome. I wonder what sort of your philosophy or idea behind that would be.
In the middle. I think you're absolutely right. Coming from a place of the head and an idea and an expectation can interfere greatly with a ceremony, but perhaps also coming in willy-nilly, not really sure why you're there, and maybe your best friend went and you think you should go too. You don't miss out on the party. I don't know. There is something in the middle. I always have something of intention, and I'm ready to change my mind if ayahuasca takes me into another direction. So that I've got my sort of backup. I've got my intention that I think, and it does happen sometimes where ayahuasca is taking me into another direction, and I just say thank you. We'll go there. If you think this is the direction we need to go tonight, I'm willing. But it's good to have intention too. I mean, even on any spiritual journey, why are we doing this? Or what do we what healing do we want? What's really needed to in our healing journey? What are the obstacles? It's good to have some clarity around that. Writing is useful for that too. Mm-hmm. And the pre-preparation days, I like to give myself between the 2 and the 4 days before the ceremony, where I'm holding this in my consciousness fairly loosely. Like I said, I don't want to be too attached to an idea that I'm going specifically to heal this issue, but I hold it in my consciousness, and I try to touch some of the deeper inner parts of myself and say, what am I really sensing that I'm needing right now? And I just ask the question, and sometimes that question is an intention.
And I wanted to ask a little bit too, with sort of following on that with regards to ayahuasca, because I know we refer to it a lot as a medicine, and it really is something very powerful that can just transform our minds and sort of get us in touch with parts of ourselves we haven't seen or haven't known, and it is powerful for healing and just even looking at with the outcomes. But I guess I wanted to compare a little bit maybe ayahuasca, and especially given that it's done in a very much of a ceremonial context, and with a lot of respect and reverence towards Mother Aya, as you will. And I wonder how, like, if maybe you wanted to touch upon like how this is different than, like, let's say someone taking mushrooms or LSD, maybe even with the same intention, kind of therapeutically. But I wonder if there's like, is there something specific to ayahuasca, or is there something that comes with the ceremony that sort of helps set it apart from, I guess, the other one? Just because, like, I've never heard of, not often at least, that someone would say be doing small, some kind of ayahuasca at home without like a shaman present, whereas mushrooms or LSD, that's actually quite frequent. Maybe you'll have a guide, but it's in a different context, I guess.
So I can't speak to mushrooms and LSD and other psychedelics because I haven't experienced them. I do know people do them, and some people do receive therapeutic benefits to different degrees. And I know that there's research being done, and Johns Hopkins University and such. And I know people personally who tell me that they work with mushrooms and they get lots of help from it. If I could speak, just for some reason, I'm very much drawn to the ceremonial aspect to it, and I connect very deeply to it, and I really respect and appreciate the containment that it holds, the holding of the focus, and the deeper connection with the medicine and the lineage of medicine people who are standing behind the shaman. I just can't say enough about that. And to give just maybe a little bit of backstory about how is that I heard that ayahuasca came to the people in the first place was because the chances of ayahuasca being discovered sort of accidentally by, more primitive peoples is really, really unlikely, because the combination of the two plant parts that are used and, boiled together, the chances of people having found that by themselves is, I think, quite unlikely. And the stories that I've heard from that may go back approximately 5,000 years, give or take, is that the spirit of ayahuasca herself actually called the first medicine people, the shaman, the doctor of the village, to her, and it spoke in a way that shamans can hear plants speak, however that is, and it was given with some specific instructions on how this plant wanted to be used in order to help the village people. And as far as I know, that tradition has kept fairly tight within their communities, at least until the first anthropologists discovered them in maybe the 50s, and sort of become more popular in the 70s, and now, of course, you can buy it on the internet and such. But the tradition was kept very tight, and there's a lot that goes into a shaman learning this. First of all, it's my understanding that shamans don't choose to become an ayahuasquero. They are called, and they have special traits that make them very conducive to this work. And it's not glamorous work, by the way. It's an all life encompassing service to helping the people. And originally, as I understand the story, the shamans were the only ones who drank the ayahuasca, and the village people came to them for diagnosis. And then the shaman would say, oh, these are the plants that you need to heal whatever the psycho or physical or emotional illness was. And I heard that when the Westerners started coming, some of the shamans just threw their arms up and said, you Westerners are much too complex for us. Drink the stuff yourself. How true that is, I don't know, but it makes sense to me. So Westerners were invited to drink the medicine themselves and sort of guide themselves through the journey with the help of the shaman, of course, and the guidance. And so that's how it's come about to being used the way that it is now. But certainly the songs, and there's much more into it that I can't speak because I'm not shamanically literate that way. You'd have to speak to a shaman and ask that question. But what I do experience is a very strong container. I know that no matter what happens, I'm going to be safe, and that's really important for healing work to happen. I know that nothing can go wrong. That the connection that I have with ayahuasca and that the shaman has, and it's all in a building itself. That's important for these ceremonies, that they're actually inside of, say, 4 walls or within a physical structure. That's important as part of the containment of the ceremony, just to properly take care of the people. And I personally wouldn't, sit otherwise without a ceremonial container and a very well-trained shaman who has spent time in the jungle, has done numerous dietas, in particular the dietas that really qualify them to do this work. And I don't know how many, trustworthy ones that there are. And I think if you have one, you're very, very fortunate.
Shannon, we're just drawing up towards the 3 o'clock mark. There's just another question or two I want to kind of get in before we sort of open this up for everyone else. There's, I'm sure, a fair bit more that we want to kind of dive into as well. I just want to ask a little bit too, I mean, kind of what you're saying, with I think is really interesting, with having that sort of that safety and having that someone there that can help you guide through this. You're in a very vulnerable state, of course, and just having sort of that those necessary safeguards that come with that, I think, is really important. I do find it sort of interesting, like where it's going sort of with the Westerners. Like how do you? I guess I wanted to get a little bit of your opinion on this and to see like how do people feel about this and where it's going with regards to like a little bit more mainstreaming of ayahuasca and things. I know like 20 years ago or so, you probably would never have heard of ayahuasca, but it's become more popular and mainstream in this sense. And, in one sense you think, well, you want people to have this ability to experience this healing and everything, but in what ways is that it can be done respectfully and not sort of abused and become sort of this popular thing that you do for the sake of, putting it on your Instagram rather than actually having a deep, meaningful experience and maybe healing traumas. I just wonder if you have any thoughts to add on with that.
Well, lots, but I think the main thing is that the psychological and physical, to a certain degree, and the emotional preparation that you're ready to do this depth, this level of work. Not everybody's ready, and that's okay. I think that's why it's also really good to have some meditation, practice that helps hold your focus. It's a very strong experience. It's not for the faint of heart. It can be harrowing sometimes, and the ability to have some practices or ways that you can hold yourself in presence and in stability is really important. Sometimes people with ADHD have some challenges with that. Doesn't mean they shouldn't come to this medicine for work, to do this work, but just to really be ready. And that could be quite a longer discussion about when somebody is ready. And it is becoming more popular and trendy, and that's probably not the best reason to do it. I sense that there are more and more people coming out of curiosity. Who am I to say that that's not the right way to do it? But my own experience with ayahuasca says, like, she's not really there to entertain anybody. She's not there for just sort of like a psychonaut exploration. I think she might disappoint if people do come for that. That could be a reason for a block in some people's case, that they came expecting to see glowing lights and a nice light show, and so I think if you're working, if you sit in the ceremony, you pretty much know right away if she's going to be a really good ally for you. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time to settle into this medicine, to sort of learn how to navigate and how to hold yourself and such. But it isn't for everybody. But yeah, I'm so very thankful and grateful that she has come up north and into the west to offer her assistance and her help and her healing, because we really need it.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things too doing is that in sort of as we're spreading sort of word about ayahuasca and what it is, it's really important to do it in the context of understanding the bigger picture and everything that comes with it, and just giving people the information that, you know, this isn't something that you just play around with it, and, you know why you come for it and what risks come with it, and what it can do for you, and just to see all of that rather than just this popularized thing. So maybe I wanted to just kind of finish off a little bit and get sort of your thoughts on what is something for those people that are or have been considering things like ayahuasca. What are things that they can do to like, what are features or characteristics of a good shaman, or like what are things that they should look out for or not, and maybe any things that they should have in mind with regards to this.
I wish that was an easier question to answer, because part of me wants to say, go strongly with your intuition, not your whim, but your intuition. They should certainly have done extensive dietas in the jungle, and teaching dietas, not just healing dietas. They should have extensive use. I would say they should have years of experience with under the tutelage as an apprentice down there, and probably most importantly, that they still have a connection to a living teacher down there, because there's things can come up, difficulties can come up, very difficult energies can come up that even the shamans need to have the backing and the support of somebody who's perhaps in their 70s or 90s down there that's holding space for them to do this work. That's something that gives me a great deal of confidence, and would be something I would really want to know is, are you still learning? Are you still connected to your teacher or teachers? And are you dieting? Are you doing your dietas? And you can't ask a shaman, tell me all about your diet, so I want to see your resume. That's where I think, connecting a little bit, definitely having consultation firsthand, meet the shaman, or make sure it's highly recommended by someone who's experienced already. This is word of mouth. You can't really find a shaman on the websites, not really. And if you could, I wouldn't go to them myself. It's word of mouth. When you see your friend is changing before your eyes, and you ask them, how are you doing this? What are you connected to? And they say, well, I go to these ceremonies. That's probably a good way to know if you'll be in good hands or not.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Shannon, for sharing all this. There's lots more I want to ask you, but I want to really give the chance to sort of open this up to the Q&A and let people sort of ask their questions regarding to what we just spoke about. So we're not done quite yet. I'm just going to pass it over to Ken. He's going to be doing the moderating, and then he'll sort of help bring up the questions. So thank you so much, Shannon.
Oh, you're welcome.
Cool. So as mentioned, for those who have questions, there's the raise hand function if you go to the participants panel on your phone or on the computer, and you can raise your hand if you want to ask a question verbally. I've got a few in the chat that I'm going to ask out now. So I'll start here, Shannon, with a question from Rick. He's asking, Shannon, can you speak about dreams post-ceremony? Would you say this is a form of communication from the medicine? How much weight or significance would you put in the dreams that are experienced? And how long does the medicine stay in your system?
Okay. Well, I can't speak too much to dreams. I'm not a big dream worker myself, so I really wouldn't have anything to offer you on that. But there are others who do. But in terms of how long does it take for it to wear off, I would say that once you've received ayahuasca into your body, she is with you forever. At least that's my sense. I don't think she's ever left me. But to feel more of that physical connection, it's different for everybody, and it's different each ceremony. My first ceremony, I felt her with me, beside me for 2 months. And I remember the day where I felt like the gates or the doors to my heart just kind of closed a little. And I just remember the sad feeling of, oh, she just left me. But generally it's a few days to a couple of weeks where I'm sort of riding that tail end, and it very much depends on whether I have kept the diet recommendations. Salt and sugar will just snap it right out. And I mean, when I say snap it right out, your healing journey is going to go on forever, no matter what. It's not, nothing's over. But having that stronger, palpable connection, I tend to feel that as soon as I start having salt. Okay.
Awesome. So on the speaking of the dieta, I know you did talk about this a little bit. So is there any? Alex had asked if there's any specific highlights about dietas that you could share.
I'm not so qualified in the sense that I've only done a couple myself. I'm a baby at that. But I would, if I could just say briefly that I would say that ayahuasca is sort of like almost like the sort of entry into the vegetalismo tradition, and the dietas is where all the work really starts getting done. So once somebody has really worked through some big icebergs with the ayahuasca, she'll often point into a direction or give maybe some signals to the shaman, or the shaman will suggest there's a plant that may help you with a particular nervous system sensitivity that you have, or something like that, and recommend and perhaps offer you to diet under him. It's quite a good big undertaking, and it takes a little bit of time to be in the tradition for a little while to understand the nuance of it and the power of it. But it's kind of that next level ayahuasca, I would say. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So this is one that might be on a lot of people's minds, that I did get there is a specific question. And again, Shannon, feel no obligation to share more than you're comfortable with here. But the question was, what can you suggest to someone who's ready and looking to find a place to do a ceremony? Okay.
My first answer is going to be, pray. You pray and ask for what you would like. Today is a really good day for a prayer like that. This is the solstice. It's also the new moon, and it's also an eclipse. So it's a very auspicious day. It's a good day for a little, personal ceremony where you make your commitment to your healing journey, and you ready yourself and say, I'm ready to meet, someone who can help me. Most often that's how people find ayahuasca, is through word of mouth, through other people. Somebody at a dinner party somewhere will say the word ayahuasca, and you'll hear it across the table, and it's a calling. The way I understand it is ayahuasca calls people, and then you can choose to answer the call or not. But be patient for that connection. And I apologize if it sounds a little bit woo-woo, but that's been my experience, and of other people that I've known over the years. You get called, and it's a privilege and an honor when you're called, as opposed to sort of demanding and signing up and paying your fee and being a client or a customer.
Awesome, thank you. Your woo-woos are safe here.
Hold back a little.
So we got Andres here with his hand up, so I will go ahead and unmute you there.
All right,
ahead,
thank you.
Andres.
So Shannon, I just have, there's one line of, one domain I have questions about. And so I guess, what are your thoughts on kind of using ayahuasca or even other psychedelics in general, kind of as a form of spiritual bypassing of going past the work? I mean, you kind of talked about that in terms of the integration, that the real work comes after, but have you found, or do you have thoughts on, people who seek out psychedelic experiences to think that they've gone kind of, beyond those kinds of problems?
Yes, that's a word that comes to mind quite often, and I have my opinions about it. I just want to do a little check to see if you could still hear me, because my screen's gone blank. Are we still connected and hooked up?
You sound great.
Okay,
good.
It just blanked out for a moment. I think it's very possible that there's quite a bit of fireworks with ayahuasca. She's magnificent in so many ways, and it can be distracting sometimes to see all that beauty and such. And sometimes the ego comes back in the next day and takes a little bit of credit for what it saw, and Somebody may have missed the point a little bit, because she does often help people come into a state of oneness and a state of just, you know, complete okayness and bliss with who and how they are in this moment, you know, it's a spiritual experience, for lack of a better word, and it can be very drawing. People may want to come back to that, and I think that it's that divine, beautiful grace that she shows us. This is how divine you actually are. This is your true nature. And when we go home, you know, we may have an argument with our spouse the minute we walk in the door, or eat crappy food, or go to light that joint again, or whatever it is, you know, and it's like, yeah, we might have missed something there. So yeah, I think it's a possible trap, but I've also known people who, you know, ayahuasca doesn't tend to put up with that for too long, because they tend to start having some flat ceremonies. And that's a time to take maybe a little break and reassess what they are working with this medicine for, and getting clear, and maybe come back a little later. And I've seen that happen with some of my friends, people I know.
Awesome. So real quick, someone asked if you could mention the 2 documentaries again, and I'll try to type them into the chat.
Vine of the Soul.
Write them down.
I think they were in the comments. Heidi responded. Vine of the Soul.
Oh.
But the better one
Jungle Medicine.
is Jungle Prescription by David Suzuki. It's about 9 years old, I think.
Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you. I have one myself, actually, which is in terms of expectation setting. So I've seen some folks have, you know, you see studies around folks having like very life-changing, you know, experiences after their first time. And I've heard stories of people on the other end that can take years before they kind of get to a significant place of change. And I don't expect anyone to ever be 100% fully cooked, you know, you know, or like, but it is from your experience, what you have seen others, you know, and yourself, is there kind of like a plateau that is kind of realistic, not with like a number or number of times or a number of years, but I don't know a better way to describe it, some kind of like a plateau where people feel like a different way, like there is a significant change where they, you know, really feel some impact, or is it just like a forever struggle to, you know, until you know, they come one with the earth again?
Probably both of what you said. The healing work is never complete. It is ongoing as long as humans are here on this earth. Healing just means coming into greater and greater degrees of oneness and letting everything else go. So it gets subtler. The work gets subtler as time goes on. The other part of your question is, I think it's very individual. People work at their own pace. We all have different temperaments and physical constitutions and different levels of trauma, earlier versus later levels of, you know, trauma, and different resourcefulness. So there's some people that come into ceremony for their first time. By the end of the weekend, they just like, it's like big light has gone off. And you think, wow, you're going to go home and you're going to make changes. And when I talk to those people later, it's impressive what they got in such a short period of time, depending on their openness level, how able they are to surrender to this process and say, yes, I'm ready to let it go. Some people, their attachments are a little stronger to some of their traumas, and they're going to hang on a bit longer. And that's okay. And they may take a little bit longer. There's no judgment either way. I think the name of the game is to stay in the game and to keep at it. And there's no judgment. It takes however long it takes to heal. You would never have a cut on your finger and, you know, a week later it's just sort of scabbing over and you're like, come on, you're not healing fast enough. It takes however long it takes, and you just keep showing up. You just keep
Cool. Understood.
So there's different, I would say that there's a point where the work starts to become more subtler. In my own experience, where some of the big icebergs have been busted through. You know, I don't have the shaking and the tremors. I haven't for quite a number of years, but there's a refinement occurring where I'm tapping into deeper and deeper layers myself, and my responses out in the world are getting much more nuanced, much more empathetic, much more kind and caring, and I'm able to stay present in more and more difficult situations. And to me, that's just feedback that
great.
process is continuing.
Excellent. Well, we've got one more, and this one is something I personally went through myself, but it was asked by someone in the chat room who wanted to remain anonymous. So what happens if after your ceremony, you dissolve your illusion of life and come back to a society that you feel nothing in common with?
Hard one.
You know, maybe more, I've definitely seen others say like, oh, after a big experience, you know, they come back and they're like, they feel this massive change and they don't feel at place or whatever. And they kind of want to go, you know, go off to a commune in the woods somewhere and you know, become a monk or something. Like, you know, do you have any, I've seen that.
Take care of yourself and take care of your heart the days after. Come back into society very slowly and carefully. Avoid shopping malls and grocery stores if you can, you know, for the first 4 days at least. Just come home or go to another safe place and, you know, just really take care of your heart, because it certainly in the beginning, and I experienced that much more in the beginning than I do now, but I felt like I would be re-traumatized by coming back and seeing some of the grossness of things, the carelessness, the density of certain behaviors, and things in our society that are not health giving. I started to see them, they pop up in front of me and it would hurt my heart. So my best answer to your question is take care of your heart and soothe yourself if you need to, and protect where you can, and just slowly acclimatize yourself. And that brings up one more point that it could be, you know, one of the reasons why I continue to come back to the medicine, and many people do, even, you know, when large amounts of the healing's, you know, accomplished, is that the way our society is and the world that we're living in, there's a lot of forces that go against our health and happiness. Sitting in offices with, you know, poor air and no sunlight for 8 hours in front of computers, things like that. I mean, the list can go on. And it does take a toll on our bodies and our minds and on our hearts. And so sometimes I come to ayahuasca for what I call as a little dust off, you know, just like, you know, I've been in grocery stores a lot lately, and I've been, you know, busying around a bit too much and lost a little bit of connection to myself. And I feel like I just need a little bit of a cleanse, and she often helps with that. And so in the beginning, it's good to develop strategies or tools to really take care of that.
Excellent. All right, well, that's all the questions we have. And based on the timing, I think we could probably squeeze in 2 breakouts after we take a minute or 2 break. Christoph, is there anything you wanted to say before we, as we close off here, the formal portion? Just a reminder, if anyone does not want to participate in breakouts, now is the time to leave. It helps us get a more even spread of the rooms. You have 2 minutes to do that. And then, as I said, we're going to come back and we'll have some breakout groups, and then we'll we're going to try to, I think we'd like to do 2. I'm going to probably go like 15 minutes with that, so we can kind of shake it up to get some new faces in there. So Christoph, is there anything else to say before we take the break?
Yeah, I was just going to quickly just thank, well, firstly, Ken for doing the moderating. It's a challenging job, and just for doing all this, it's trying to do everyone all at once and get messages from her. So that's a big thing. So thank you, Ken, for doing that. I also want to thank Michael for coming on board and just giving us that update and everything. If you guys want to get in touch, I believe he will share his email in the chat, but you can also find him on the Maps Canada. It's you can find him there. And of course, I want to thank especially Shannon for coming on and doing this whole thing with us and just giving us her insights and going through all this. So I really appreciate what you've come and brought on and offered for us. So thank you all of you guys for doing this.